Welcome to this Gearwig video tutorial on firing into melee in Warmachine. Targeting a model in melee with a ranged or magical attack is a risky proposition. Models that are duking it out in a scrum are more difficult to hit. Additionally, ranged attackers run the risk of hitting other models involved in the melee. In this video, we'll discuss the specific penalty ranged attackers suffer when they fire into a melee combat, and how exactly to determine whether or not a ranged attack accidentally hits another member of that combat. Let's start by defining what it means for a model to be in melee. A model is considered to be in melee if it is either engaging an enemy model or being engaged by an enemy model. A model engages another when it has an enemy model in its melee range. A model cannot engage a friendly model. In this example here, we can see that Boomhowler and this Skinwalker are clearly engaging each other. They each have the other enemy model in their own melee ranges. Thus, both models are considered in melee. Along the top, we see that the Stormclad is clearly engaging the Gnarlhorn with his reach melee weapon. This Gnarlhorn here is not engaging any model. He does not have any enemy models in his melee reach in his front arc. So he is not engaging any models. But he is still being engaged by the Stormclad. So, both the Gnarlhorn and the Stormclad are considered in melee. Lastly, the Argus here is not quite close enough to engage the Stormclad. The Argus does not have reach, and the Stormclad is just outside of his half-inch melee range, so the Argus is not engaging any enemy models. He is also not being engaged by any enemy models. He is in the Stormclad's back arc, so he is not in the Stormclad's melee range, so he is not being engaged by the Stormclad. Since the Argus is neither engaged nor engaging, the Argus is not considered to be in melee. When a model targets another model with a ranged or magical attack, and that target model is in melee, then the attacking model suffers a -4 penalty to his attack roll. Just like normal, the attacker would declare a target and then measure to see if that target were in range. If the target were in range, the attacker makes an attack roll with the -4 penalty. If our blood tracker here declared the troll as a target, she would measure, see that he was within her 7-inch range, and then make an attack roll with a -4 penalty. If this attack roll were to succeed, the blood tracker would roll damage like normal. There would be no other effect for the target being in melee. When an attacker declares a shot against a target that is out of range, like our blood tracker here declaring a shot against the gun mage, the ranged attack will automatically miss, the way out-of-range attacks always automatically miss. There is no chance that this out-of-range attack could possibly hit another target, even though the target is in melee. When a target in melee is out of range, the attack automatically misses just like normal, and that is the end. It is when a ranged attacker fires at a target in range when the target is in melee, and then misses that attack, that things get interesting. When a ranged attacker misses such an attack, she must immediately re-roll the attack roll against another nearby model. Determining secondary targets is a complicated process. The secondary target for a missed ranged attack into melee is chosen from a pool of eligible targets. This pool consists of every model in melee with the original target, plus every model in melee with those targets. The original target, the target that was missed to start this, is not considered an eligible secondary target. Neither is any model whose line of sight is completely blocked by terrain. We ignore intervening models when determining secondary targets, so they don't count as line of sight blocking for these purposes. So here we have an example of a particularly ridiculous scrum. Our Reeve, on the upper left, has decided to fire a shot at the Stormclad. The Stormclad, of course, is in melee. He is engaging both the Skinwalker and the Druid with his reach weapon. So the Reeve shot gets a -4 penalty. Let's assume she fires, and the shot misses. Since her target was in her weapon's range when her attack missed, she now must immediately re-roll the attack against an eligible target. The eligible targets include the Skinwalker and the Druid, who are both in melee with the Stormclad. We now must also include every model in melee with those models. So we can see that this Boomhowler on the lower section is in melee with the Druid, so he counts as an eligible target. The Boomhowler at the top is also in melee with the Skinwalker, so he counts as an eligible target. Even though the Skinwalker isn't actually engaging this Boomhowler, the Boomhowler is engaging him, so they are considered to be in melee together. And we have to include everyone who is in melee with our Skinwalker as a potential secondary target. The Gun Mage along the top is also in melee with the Skinwalker. The Skinwalker's reach weapon is engaging him. But his line of sight is completely blocked by that obstruction to the Reeve. So the Reeve of Orboros cannot see him at all. Thus he is not an eligible target for a secondary attack, even though he is in melee with the Skinwalker. We discount the Gun Mage. Our member of the Black 13th here, Watts, is not in melee at all. He's in the Skinwalker's back arc, so he's not in the Skinwalker's melee range. Watts' melee range is only a ½ inch, so he is not engaging the Skinwalker. He is not in melee at all. He is not an eligible target for the secondary attack. Boomhowler himself here, similarly, is not in melee. He's a friendly model with the Stormclad, so he can't engage the Stormclad with his own melee attack. He's too far away from the Druid to be engaged by the Druid, so Boomhowler is not in melee at all. He is not considered an eligible target for the secondary attack. So when it's all said and done, the secondary attack could potentially hit the Skinwalker, the Druid, and 2 of the Boomhowlers. Once all the eligible targets have been determined, we randomly choose one by rolling a die after assigning a number to each target, and decide who the attack roll will be rolled against. The secondary attack roll must use all boosts and bonuses that the first one did. So it would benefit from the aiming bonus or any sort of boost or special abilities that the initial attack benefited from. It's the exact same attack roll. You do take into account new potential defensive bonuses. For instance, if the secondary attack were to be fired on the Skinwalker, the attack would get a +2 benefit because it comes from the Skinwalker's back arc. Of course, the Skinwalker is also considered to be in melee, so the attack would additionally suffer the -4 firing into melee penalty. Other rules like stealth that would cause the attack to miss automatically are applied normally. If a special rule prohibits a model from even being targeted, then that model would not be considered eligible, the same way the Gun Mage is not eligible because we can't draw a line of sight to him. After the secondary attack is resolved, be it a hit or a miss, the ranged attack is resolved completely. It can't potentially hit a third model. Let's take a look at some special rules that tweak or ignore firing into melee. When a model fires an AoE attack into melee, that model still suffers the -4 penalty like normal. However, when an AoE attack into melee misses, we don't determine a secondary attack like we did with a normal ranged attack. The AoE simply scatters like normal. So when Ryan here fires her Mage Storm into the Reeve next to the Troll, she suffers a penalty for doing so, but on a miss it'll just scatter off like normal. Spray attacks specifically ignore the firing into melee penalty, so they do not suffer that -4. Additionally, if a spray attack that is fired into melee misses, we don't determine an eligible target and make a secondary attack roll. Spray attacks don't care at all whether a model is in melee. If our Argus barked at Boomhowler here, he would roll against Boomhowler's normal defense. He wouldn't suffer the -4 penalty of the attack roll. And if the attack missed, we wouldn't determine a secondary target. So even though our Druid is in melee with Boomhowler here, there's no chance the Druid could accidentally be hit by the spray. Some models, like Watts here, have the Gunfighter advantage. This advantage gives Watts a ½ inch melee range with his ranged weapon, his guns, and allow him to ignore the firing into melee penalty when he attacks a model he is in melee with. So, if he were to take a shot at the Skinwalker here, he would roll normally, even though the Skinwalker is clearly in melee with both Boomhowler and Watts. Watts does not have to suffer the firing into melee penalty. However, if his gunfighter attack misses, he still must roll a secondary attack against an eligible target, ignoring both the target he missed and himself. So in this melee, the only target left would be Boomhowler. If Watts missed the Skinwalker with a gunfighter ranged attack, he would have to immediately roll a secondary attack against Boomhowler. While Boomhowler is an eligible target for a secondary attack, Watts is not considered to be in melee with Boomhowler specifically, because he cannot engage or be engaged by a friendly model. So he would still suffer the -4 firing into melee penalty when the shot got redirected onto Boomhowler. The gunfighter advantage won't let him ignore it because he is not in melee with his target. This of course benefits him nicely, he doesn't really want to shoot Boomhowler. When a model with gunfighter is not engaged with her target, and she fires into melee, she does not ignore the firing into melee penalty. So if Ryan up here were to take a shot at the Skinwalker who is clearly in melee, she would suffer the -4 penalty, even though she also has the gunfighter advantage. This only applies when she is engaging her target. Note that these Black 13th members and some other models have a special rule called Black Penny. They can apply this special rule to their shots. This special rule ignores the firing into melee penalty. If Ryan were to use this optional rule to fire at the Skinwalker, she would not suffer the -4 penalty attacking him. But if her attack missed, she would still be forced to determine a secondary target and re-roll her attack against that target. Black Penny does not ignore this. Magical attacks, like spells, work just like Gunfighter. If our Druid here were to fire a Force Bolt spell at the Stormclad, he would not suffer the firing into melee penalty, even though the Stormclad is clearly in melee with the Druid. When you're casting a spell, you can ignore the firing into melee penalty if you are in melee with your target. Again, just like Gunfighter, if this attack were to miss, you would still need to pick a secondary target and re-roll the attack roll against that. Just like Gunfighter, this ignores the target you initially missed and yourself. So in this situation, if the Druid fired at the Stormclad and missed, he would have to re-roll his attack against the Skinwalker. Just like with Gunfighter, that attack would suffer the firing into melee penalty because the Druid is not in melee with the Skinwalker. If the Druid along the top were to fire at the Stormclad, he would suffer the firing into melee penalty. Just like Gunfighter, a spellcaster needs to be in melee with its target to ignore the firing into melee penalty. So if this Druid up here were to fire into the Stormclad, he would suffer the penalty like normal, and if the attack missed, he'd have to determine a secondary target like normal and fire at him. Lastly, units with the combined ranged special rule are not allowed to make combined ranged attacks at targets in melee. This is specifically forbidden by the combined ranged attack rule. This would otherwise allow units to buff their attacks so high as to effectively ignore firing into melee. So this is not allowed. Firing into melee combat is a risky maneuver that's usually more likely to fail than succeed. When you do this and miss, remember that the pool of eligible targets is often quite large. Be sure to consider all the models in melee with your targets, plus, the next step, all the models in melee with them as well. Considering the low chance of success and random possible outcomes, it's often best to just take your finger off the trigger and let the guys with the swords and the axes do what they're trained to do. Thank you for watching. For more guides, battle reports, and articles, check out Gearwig.com. You can email me at boss@gearwig.com or check out our Facebook or Twitter pages. If you want to help the site, tell a friend and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.